Episode 5, Chapter 5, Divergence Point. Chapter 5, Divergence Point.
So, you've really never heard of the Super Mario Bros?
Luigi asked the question for the third time that morning, just to make sure.
Nothing about that name is familiar at all.
Across the truck bed, Rainey shook her head sadly. Beside her, Goombella groaned and rolled her eyes yet again.
The answer is still the same, but you're welcome to keep trying.
The Goomba girl blew a lock of stray hair from her eyes, but the wind blew it right back.
Seriously, you guys are total strangers.
Luigi shook his head, finally accepting the answer and what it meant.
No, that's good. If you've never met us, then that means our timelines diverged more than a few years ago. We need to go further back.
The old tan pickup truck bumped and rattled across the empty countryside. The so-called
Amanita Resistance
had left their shabby inn that morning, bringing their 7 new guests with them. It was early afternoon now, and the past several hours had been nothing but fields, dirt paths, and the occasional distant forest or giant mushroom patch. They were staying out of sight, Luigi had learned, so that meant back roads and mundane travel.
Why can't we just use the pipe system?
He had asked that morning, as Rolf had herded them all into the truck.
Wherever we're going, warping is still faster than driving.
The Thugan had shaken his head decisively.
The capital keeps tabs on all warp pipe use, and they tend not to like us very much. Chances are they'd pull us out halfway, and then we'd be in trouble. You ever been to Pipeline Central, buddy?
He was referring to the sprawling transit hub beneath Mushroom City. Luigi had been there a few times. It was massive, twisted, and always too crowded.
Trust me, it's not a place you want to get yourself noticed.
So, the party had chosen the scenic route. It made Luigi realize how little of the kingdom's countryside he knew, and that in turn made him realize that he was lost.
We could be anywhere,
he thought, hoping in vain to see a landmark he recognized. The sun was nowhere in sight, if this bleak world even had a sun, so their direction was a mystery, too. In short, it was the middle of nowhere, and Luigi had no idea where they would end up.
We could be heading in circles, for all I know.
Well, at least he had good company. Rolf was driving up front, and the toad known as Raz had taken the seat beside him. That left the other 9 passengers to squeeze rather snugly into the back bed. Mario took up the lion's share of space, but he needed the room to stretch his leg. He was awake now, but seemed lost in thought as he stared off into the passing wilderness. Vivian had huddled up beside him with blankets and spare gauze, claiming the back of the bed for the 2 of them alone. The remaining 7 sat lined against the sides, conferring amongst themselves and trying to puzzle out the strange situation they were in.
What about Bowser?
Yoshi asked, arms dangling lazily backwards over the side.
You know who he is, right? A wild guy like him has to have affected your history somehow.
Goombella screwed up her face in concentration, giving little shakes of her head now and then.
Wasn't he, like, some old-timey king? I know I've heard the name before, but I'm totally drawing a blank.
She eventually sighed and gave up.
Sorry, can I pass?
Rainey chimed in with the answer.
There have been several Bowsers in the royal Koopa line, but the most recent was the young prince that died 2 decades ago.
Luigi couldn't believe what he was hearing. This version of Bowser was dead? Over the years, he had just started to assume that the beast was immortal.
Yeah, the kid prince,
Goombella nodded, remembering.
I knew the name was familiar. Sorry, history isn't really my thing, you know.
That was enough to snap Mario and Vivian out of their shared daze, each looking over at Goombella like she had just sprouted wings. Luigi didn't know the girl as well as the two of them did, but even he knew that she knew everything about the kingdom's past.
No, that's not right,
Vivian whispered, chewing her lips slightly.
In our world, history is your whole life. You're, actually the one who taught me most of what I know about it.
She looked nostalgic, but also determined to find answers.
We would sit in the lobby of the Rogueport Inn every evening, and you would tell me stories until we passed out, and Mario had to carry us both upstairs.
Mario nodded, sitting up a little straighter.
The Goombella we know was an archaeology major at UGM. She's in grad school now, working on a master's degree. Well, isn't she a lucky girl?
This version of Goombella spat.
Do I look like I have the money to go to some fancy college? My family is so dirt poor I couldn't even finish high school.
She squeezed her eyes shut and turned away, wind-blown hair shrouding her face.
I mean, sure, I was into archaeology and stuff when I was a kid, but I had to grow up and move on.
Vivian looked mortified.
Oh, Goombella, I'm so sorry. I had no idea it was like that. I just thought that, well...
She trailed off as Mario put a comforting hand on her shoulder.
Nah, it's fine,
Goombella answered. She opened her eyes, but didn't turn back.
I've made the best of it. My folks kicked me out, so I spent the next few years on the road doing, like, odd jobs to earn coins. I learned a ton about the world, more than I ever would have at some lame school.
She turned back, all smiles again.
One day I ran into Rolf on the road, yeah? The rest is, well, history.
She gave a cheeky grin, like it was the best pun she had ever made. Luigi gave a polite chuckle. Nobody else seemed to get it.
Hey, did I just get name-dropped back there?
Rolf leaned out the window up ahead, his uncanny timing preventing yet another awkward silence.
Listen, there's a gas station in about half a mile, where the real roads start. If anybody needs food or has any awkward business to take care of, that'll be the place.
Everybody nodded as Rolf withdrew his head. No words were said about awkward business, but they had been sitting in the truck bed for nearly 5 hours. Out of the corner of his eye, Luigi saw Yoshi cross his legs.
Yeah, stopping is a good idea,
he thought.
Tell us more about your hobo days, Ms. Goombella.
Toad chirped from nearby.
I bet you had lots of adventures.
Goombella looked half horrified, half deeply flattered.
Well, let's see,
she began, leaning in and making a show of it.
There was this one time, I woke up in Glitzville with these 3 ninjas. They told me that. Look, I'm glad we're all making friends, but none of this helps us,
Bao interrupted from her spot in the corner. She was resting on a folded blanket, but otherwise this was one of the rare times that Luigi had actually seen a boo land. It was understandable, she couldn't hope to keep pace with a moving truck while floating, after all.
Instead of sharing personal gossip,
the ghost continued,
why don't we stick to the big historical events?
Toad groaned, but Mario held out a hand to stop him.
She's right, we need answers. This isn't a road trip, after all. I mean, it's kind of a road trip,
Toad muttered, but said no more. Goombella and Rainy glanced at each other.
Okay, sure,
the Goomba said.
If you want answers, we're your gals. How about each of you ask us your biggest question, and we'll try to string a story out of them.
Each person nodded, lapsing into silence to think of a question. In the end, Yoshi went first.
What I want to know is, who were those soldiers that attacked us back at the castle? That leads into my question,
Mario nodded.
Who kidnapped the princess, and what do they want with her? Oh, yes,
Vivian piped up.
And tell us about the Empress too, please. Why is this world's peach, evil and stuff?
It was Bo's turn next.
Tell us a little more about your resistance, if you don't mind. What do you people do? Who's in charge? Is this truck even yours? Where are you taking us, anyway?
Asked Toad.
Can I get a slushie at the gas station?
Wondered Toadette. It was down to Luigi, with one question left.
Seriously?
He asked himself.
Am I the only one here who's even a little curious about the scary nightmare sky? Okay, sure,
he sighed.
Since nobody else is asking, it might as well be me. What happened to the stars? You said this world is
broken.
But what does that mean?
There was a short silence as Goombella and Rainy whispered amongst themselves, hopefully trying to line up a story that made some kind of sense. After a minute or two, they turned back to their circle of curious listeners.
It's not your typical story time setup, but sure.
Goombella was the first to speak, blowing the hair out of her eyes again.
So, we did some talking, and Green Guy's question is actually the best place to start.
Luigi squinted in slight annoyance, but let the girl continue.
I was just a little spore back then, but everybody says it all goes back to the Shroob invasion 20 years ago.
Wait, that wasn't right. It was too recent. Mario must have thought so too, because he spoke up.
The Shroobs invaded 26 years ago, Goombella.
It was Rainy who answered, the older woman looking a little more sure of her knowledge.
Well, yes, but we're talking about the second Shroob invasion.
Everyone was alert now, and Luigi decided it was his turn to interject.
That never happened in our world. Are you saying that they came back? Yeah, exactly,
Goombella affirmed.
There was the first invasion, and then the second one 6 years later. It was way worse. Like, infinitely worse. They blasted the entire kingdom to smithereens.
There was silence as everyone processed this, and then a low sarcastic whistle from Bao.
Well, I suppose that's it. We seem to have found our point of divergence. Are we all satisfied now?
Rainy nodded, but her eyes were sad.
If that's where our timelines split, then you all are very lucky. It was a terrible time, and many people lost their lives. Several major cities, including Toad Town, were utterly destroyed. Yeah, we're still trying to clean up the mess,
Goombella added.
Sometimes people still find wrecked Shroob ships just, like, laying around. We're supposed to report any we find, so the Empire can come cart them off. They say it's for safety, but who knows what they really do with those things. Excuse me,
asked Toadette,
but how are the stars involved?
It was a good question, one that Luigi was just about to ask himself. Rainy looked up at the sky.
Well, that has to do with how the war ended. You see.
Just then, the old truck shuddered to a stop.
We're here, guys and gals,
Rolf exclaimed as he opened the door and hopped out. Luigi glanced up, and saw that they had pulled into the seediest little gas station he had ever seen. Yoshi groaned, Mario put a hand to his face, and even Vivian looked a little miffed.
But we were just starting to get somewhere,
whined Toad.
Story of my life, little dude,
answered Goombella, laughing as she hopped over the side.
Don't worry, we'll pick up right where we left off, okay?
Everybody disembarked one by one, except for Mario and Vivian, who insisted that they were fine staying put. Luigi gingerly set his sprained foot on the ground, and found that he could walk again with little pain.
It turns out I was the lucky one for once, all things considered.
Standing up, he got a good look at the surroundings. The little station and its 2 gas pumps sat at the end of the dirt road they had been driving on all morning, which turned onto a slightly larger paved road just ahead. A few hundred yards away, Luigi could see the busy traffic of a highway.
I guess we finally ran out of wilderness. You want me to get you anything, bro?
He asked, walking past his brother.
I have enough coins for a super soda, or maybe one of those gas station sandwiches. I'm fine, Luigi,
Mario smiled back.
Get yourself a treat, unless they have mushroom and meatball subs. If that's the case, buy as many as you can afford.
Somehow, Mario's stomach growled right on time. Goombella waddled past, eyes glinting with mischief.
Don't worry about those 2, Green. The leg injury is a total act. They just want to be left alone in their little love nest.
Vivian flared to Mario's defense immediately, looking fiercer than Luigi had ever seen her.
How could you say that? Mario nearly died from this injury, and I've been.
She seemed to finally process the full taunt.
Wait, what was that last part? Love nest.
She sunk into the shadows in a flash, blushing bright lavender. Mario looked mildly flabbergasted himself. Goombella cackled to herself as she walked away. Luigi followed after her, shaking his head.
Mario and Vivian? There's a strange couple. She's so quiet and shy all the time, and Mario is Mario. Nah, I don't see it.
He headed inside, which proved to be just as lousy as the outside. A few battered shelves lined the tile floor, half stocked with candy and packs of chips that were probably months stale. Behind them, the freezers were mostly empty of everything except some dodgy off-brand fruit juice. A sleeping guard chomp lay on the floor, chained to a water pipe. Somewhere, a radio crackled. Rolf was talking to the cashier, a chubby Monty mole who looked utterly tired of life. From the look of it, the Thugan was haggling for half the store, rather aggressively, and the poor mole seemed about ready to give in just so it would be over. Wanting no part of it, Luigi sidled past them and headed toward the bathroom in the back. Inside, Yoshi and Toad were washing their hands while trying to theorize about the story they had in progress. Toad was saying something about a star-powered gravity cannon, but Luigi ignored them both and headed for an empty stall. Soon, though, he found himself pondering the issue anyway. He had seen this world's Toad Town, last night in the darkness before the army had come. Thanks to time travel, he had also seen his own world's Toad Town after a violent shroob attack. He tried comparing the destruction in his head, but that line of thinking got him nowhere. The business with the stars made even less sense, but before Luigi could come up with any ideas, he heard a silky whisper and felt a light tap on his shoulder.
So, what are your thoughts on all this? You seem like the introspective type.
He looked up to see Bo's intangible face peeking through the wall with an impish grin. He nearly jumped out of his overalls and his skin at the sight of her. As if he didn't have enough problems in life, Abu had literally just waylaid him in the bathroom.
Yuri not supposed to be in here.
He hissed frantically, searching around for some way to cover up.
What do you want from me?
The ghost gave him a deadpan look.
Your thoughts, like I just said. Feelings, hunches, general ideas. You're bound to have at least a few in that head of yours. Can we maybe talk about this later?
Luigi was going to have nightmares about this forever, he just knew it.
This isn't exactly the time or the place.
Bao rolled her eyes.
Oh, all right. I was just hoping to catch you alone before the peanut gallery returned.
She brought her fan up to her mouth and giggled.
Anyway, I'm a ghost. You have absolutely nothing I care about seeing. But, if you're really that embarrassed...
She faded out of view, but Luigi heard one last whisper, right in his ear.
You're too late. I saw everything.
Luigi shivered pitifully, alone again. Of all the misfit tagalongs who could have joined the adventure, why did one of them have to be her? Far away, back in the marshy fields behind Peach's ruined castle, Bowser Koopa was watching his minions try and fail to extinguish a bonfire. It was an embarrassment. Living in the volcanic Koopa Kingdom, you would think anyone would eventually pick up on some basic fire safety. In fact, Bowser was pretty sure it was taught in schools at a hatchling level. What excuse did these numbskulls have, then? Bowser didn't know, but there were going to be some serious workplace meetings when they got back home.
Put your backs into it, troops!
The Koopa King roared down from the small hill he stood on.
No, not like that. Get out of there!
Several Shy Guys had begun walking backwards towards the fire, and were now looking at each other in confusion. Soon after, a Magic Koopa approached from the direction of the river, carrying what looked like a handful of water.
What are you doing? Go get a bucket or something!
The Magic Koopa looked at his claws, then back up at Bowser with a lame shrug.
Don't you shrug at me, soldier! You're literally magic, you can make a dang bucket!
Here came a Koopa troll carrying a bundle of sticks and leaves, which he promptly threw into the blaze.
What was that? I don't care what universe we're in, you don't kill a fire by tossing wood at it.
The Koopa troll yelled back something about smothering the flame, so Bowser shook his head and stormed off the other way, utterly giving up on the whole project. This was a total lost cause. It had been Kamek's idea to begin with, anyway. The little wizard had first noticed the burning junk heap in the castle gardens, spying the smoke from afar. After searching the castle to Bowser's satisfaction, they had regrouped and set off across the field, to see what the fire was about. The source of the smoke sat at the edge of the forest. Up close, it seemed to be the remains of some torn-down little shack. There was a pretty clear imprint in the grass nearby, and the ground was littered with broken window glass. The bonfire itself was a pile of barrels and plywood boards. It looked like it had been burning for several hours. Kamek had suggested putting out the fire to look for clues, and Bowser had thought the investigation might be interesting. Now, he was starting to suspect that the Magic Koopa was just using a distraction to weasel out of trunk-hauling duty. Bowser found Kamek by the old wooden chest, right where he had been left. The wizard had lifted the lid slightly, and was peering curiously inside.
Hey, get out of there!
The larger Koopa shouted. Kamek gave a shocked little squeal and slammed the lid shut again.
That's Koopa Troop property in there, stolen fair and square. You're here to be a guide, not snoop around in our stuff. I understand, my king,
Kamek nodded, backing away slightly.
You want me to escort you to the last remnants of your people. That is my purpose. Yeah, that's right,
Bowser confirmed.
You said the Koopas got wiped out in this timeline, but there's still a few left. I want to talk to them.
Over the little hill, the bonfire flared up higher than it ever had. There was some shouting and a few cheers, but Bowser just shook his head. Not long after, Cammy came flying back from wherever she had been.
Lord Bowser,
she began as she landed,
I'm afraid I don't have much to report. I followed these tire tracks for a few miles, hoping to catch sight of our shack burners, but they're too far gone.
Bowser waved her off, impassive. Whoever had been here, they probably meant nothing to him.
This was a waste of time, anyway. Go round up the troops and let's get moving. Oh, but they're having such fun, my lord.
The witch replied, flying up to get a better view.
We could stay the night and have a bonfire party. I'll turn you into a bonfire party,
the Koopa grumbled as he lifted the trunk once again, balancing it on the back of his shell.
Assemble the troops, that's an order.
He turned to the other mage and narrowed his eyes.
Kamek, you had better know exactly where we're going.
Other you
back home can get away with some screw UPS, but you're the new guy here.
The two Magic Koopas saluted and flew off together, leaving Bowser to trudge after them on foot. He would find Princess Peach, no matter what, but first he needed to see what had become of his kingdom. He needed the kingdom to see him.
This is a messed up new world,
he thought grimly to himself,
and it's about time I had my army back.
The truck was back on the road, and Mario was immensely glad to have real pavement below him now. He stretched his injured leg and gave his toes a little wiggle, making sure to keep the blood flowing as it should. The bumpy dirt and gravel paths had been a trying experience, but overall he was already feeling much better than he had that morning. He had always healed fast, and his friends had done a great job patching him up. Now, if he could just get his hands on a hearty meal or two, the hero was certain he'd be back in action in no time. Still, he felt like a total fool. It was his own fault for getting stabbed in the first place, in spite of Yoshi's warnings.
I just ran in, and it nearly got me killed. I put everyone else at risk, too.
If there was one thing Mario couldn't stand, it was the thought of being useless while other people needed his help.
I should have been awake and fighting with them, not half dead and being carried.
Silently, he vowed it wouldn't happen again. Every mistake was a lesson, and every failure was an opportunity to try harder. It was the first rule by which he lived his life, and it had gotten him pretty far. Mario turned to Vivian, who sat nearby watching the horizon as the wind made a terrible mess of her pale pink hair. As he understood it, she had saved his life. He didn't doubt it for an instant, even if he didn't know all the details. The siren was much braver than she believed herself to be, and when push came to shove she never gave up. He admired that greatly about her. That said, her shyness was still a struggle. She had spent the morning sharing a blanket with him, chatting and sightseeing like old friends. But after Goombella's little love nest jab, she had scooted over to sit much further away. Mario knew the Goomba girl was just being playful, but poor Vivian had been clearly distraught by the whole idea. He would give her the space she needed, but in the back of his mind, he was already starting to miss her soft warmth. Elsewhere in the bed, Mario's other friends were munching on whatever small snacks they had picked up back at the station. Yoshi and Toad were sharing a large bag of vibrantly colored candies, as Goombella sipped on some fruit juice. Luigi had gotten himself a sandwich, although he had set it down halfway through, and was now beginning to look a bit ill. Toadette was sulking by herself. Sadly, she had not gotten a slushie. They were on the highway now, and vehicles of every shape and size were speeding by all around them. Every now and then, they passed by an intersection or a small town, each emptier and shabbier than the last. Off in the distance, parallel to the road, the thin line of the ocean ran the length of the horizon.
We're following the coast, so we must be going either east or west,
Mario thought to himself.
So, where were we?
Goombella eventually asked, setting down her half-empty juice bottle.
Something about the shrubs, yeah.
Suddenly, all eyes were on her. They had been promised answers earlier, and it seemed that now was finally the time. Mario sat up as best he could, straining to listen over the noise of the surrounding engines.
Actually,
Vivian raised her hand nearby.
You were going to explain why the stars went out.
Luigi nodded eagerly in agreement. Mario recalled that he had asked that specific question.
Right, well, about that.
Rainey looked slightly uncomfortable as she started speaking.
The truth is, we don't know exactly what happened.
A collective groan went up, but she kept talking.
The shrubs vanished without a trace on the same night the stars did. One night they were here, the next they were gone and the invasion had ended. The popular bedtime story is that the star spirits and their children sacrificed themselves to save the world, but I'm not sure if I believe it, to be honest. Yet, because of what happened to the princess,
Goombella continued.
See, she supposedly got kidnapped right before it all happened. That Prince Bowser kid did, too. It was some big crisis, or something. The thing is, she lived, and he didn't. I guess I wish it had been the other way around, because she grew up to be a total bi.
Rainey cut her off.
What Goombella means is, the Empress has had a hard life. She's in a difficult position, and she has some unpopular policies, but it's not her fault the world is in such bad shape. The planet started dying when the stars left us, not because of her. Oh please,
Goombella let out a sardonic laugh.
She's not some fragile tragic sob story. She's totally crazy and completely evil.
She took a long swig of her juice.
I mean, have you seen the towns out here? What has Empress Toadstool ever done to help these people? Everyone outside the capital is practically living in ditches because of her.
The Toad Woman bowed her head sadly.
I still think we should try to sympathize with her. She's deeply traumatized and needs help. We're the resistance, Rainey. Not a support group.
Goombella looked like she wanted to kick something.
We're trying to overthrow her and everything she stands for, remember?
Rainey said nothing else, so the small argument appeared to be over. The floor was open, so Mario decided to ask another question that had been on his mind.
Why are we here, though? Why did your Peach kidnap our Peach?
Goombella shrugged as best she could, which wasn't very well.
No idea. That's why we tried that whole thing with the fake-in, remember? All I know is, things have gotten weird ever since that hooded freak showed up.
Yoshi looked like he was about to interject, but she cut him off.
Before you ask, I have no idea who the heck that is. Just another eccentric magical toady. You know the type.
Mario did know the type. They were distressingly common, in fact. Still, there was something uniquely off about the creature he had met the night before. Something he couldn't quite place. Goombella gave a tired sigh, finished her drink, and turned away from the group to stare at the far-distant shoreline.
That's enough info for now. No more questions, I'm all tattled out. Just one more, please,
Vivian quietly asked, as Goombella turned to her with weary eyes.
Where exactly are we going right now? We're headed to Rogueport, she answered, the one place in this backwards world that isn't a total mess.
Everybody was silent after that, letting the roar of the engines and the distant ocean air carry their thoughts to places far away. Night had fallen once again, but Princess Peach couldn't stay in bed for another minute if her life depended on it. She wasn't tired, but then again she never had been in the first place. There was nothing to do in this weird little room, and even looking around gave her the shivers. She had spent the day trying to nap and ignore it all, but that plan had failed miserably. Between her inactivity and the unending music box tune, she felt like she was beginning to go mad. She walked over to the window and pushed it open, breathing deeply as the cool night air washed over her. Far away, the lights of Mushroom City's proud skyline twinkled like the stars this world no longer had. Peach would have given anything to be out amongst those lights, instead of here in this little pink cell.
Where is Mario?
She found herself wondering.
Is he safe? Will he even come for me if he is?
She knew she had hurt him, but their breakup had been best for them both. The day he had shown her his mother's engagement ring, a keepsake to be given to his own special one someday, she had known it was time to end things. Mario deserved someone who could treasure that ring, and the man who gave it to her, not a princess whose first love would always be her kingdom. Sighing, she pulled herself from her thoughts. No, Mario was her friend. He would come if he could, and if he couldn't she would escape by herself. She had done it before, and she could do it again if she had to. She was about to head back inside to pursue that line of logic, but a sudden cacophony down below diverted her attention to the ground. Peach looked down from her tower, and saw an uncountable crowd sprawling beneath her. Soldiers and civilians alike had turned out to fill the courtyards of the city palace as far as the eye could see. Shouts and cheers echoed between the ivory towers in 1,000 ringing voices, as trumpets blared out an unfamiliar fanfare. Here and there an odd firework went off, lighting up the walls in pink or yellow or blue.
What is going on now?
Slowly, ponderously, 2 pieces of the huge outer wall slid back and away, retracting to become a massive gate. The assembled crowd began cheering like mad as the gap became ever wider, slowly revealing a grand parade of soldiers and flag bearers. Peach leaned out for a better look, but the sudden chill of the wind made her pull back. Line by line they came marching in, clearing a path down the main avenue as bands played and colorful acrobats flipped and tumbled along behind them. The music swelled, the people rioted, and the very towers of the palace seemed to tremble as the palanquin came into view. At first, Peach wasn't even sure what she was looking at. The immense structure shone like a sun come to earth, a perfect mountain of sculpted white gold and cascading swirls of jewels, all lit to a glimmer by 100 mounted torches. It was held aloft not by soldiers, but by a glowering crew of stony hwamps. The great golems marched and grunted in echoing unison, bearing their brilliant load and leering dangerously at any bystander who strayed too close. Peach recalled the mysterious letter that had been left on her bedside table.
I cannot be there to meet you at present, it had said, but I assure you that we will speak face to face very soon.
This was it, then. Her mysterious kidnapper had arrived at last. The princess watched the parade for as long as she could, but eventually the palanquin passed out of view behind the walls of her tower. The frenzied crowd followed after it, and Peach was left by herself once again.
What kind of person needs that much grandeur?
She asked herself, leaning on the windowsill.
The entire great hall of my castle could have fit inside that monstrous thing.
She shook her head as the noise faded away into the night, and reached out to grab the window latch. But before she could pull it shut, a far distant figure caught her eye. Beyond the avenues and courtyards, atop another ivory tower, a lone silhouette watched the parade in still silence. It stood atop the spire, facing the direction the people and the light had gone, utterly unmoving save for the subtle rippling of its cloak in the wind. Peach gasped softly to herself, recognizing the entity that had abducted her the night before. In an instant, the hooded figure had turned to face her, drawing back slightly in surprise as the princess met its gaze across the dark divide. She stared at it from her window, and it presumably stared back. For a minute, neither moved. Then suddenly, almost hastily, the hooded figure pulled a book from its robe, flipped a few pages, raised a hand to the sky. And then it was gone, vanished like morning mist, leaving the distant tower's rooftop as empty as the heavens above. End of chapter.